Andrea Sachs, or Andy for the bezies, is a 20-something-year-old writer who moved to New York City to become a journalist. After months of trying to get a job, she somehow lands the gig of second assistant at the world-renowned fashion magazine Runway, despite having no interest in fashion.
What makes you think I'm not interested in fashion?
In trying to fulfill the impossible expectations of her new boss, Miranda Priestley, Andy starts to turn her back on her loved ones and everything she believes in. Portrayed in the 2006 film adaptation by Anne Hathaway, Sachs is your classic heroine. She has a dream, she does everything within her power to achieve it, but ends up making some wrong choices along the way until she is faced with the fact that she no longer recognizes herself. Empowered by this self-reflection, she quits and tries to make amends where possible. And as they always say, classics become classics for a reason. This seasoned framework is extremely effective at conveying the characters' motivations and struggles, making it easy for the audience to relate to the protagonist. Like every trope though, it's not 100% foolproof. Simply having these story beats set in place does not guarantee a compelling story. You still need good writing to make an audience care. Which is where The Devil Wears Prada musical comes in. The much anticipated musical adaptation with music by Elton John is currently one of the hottest tickets in the West End, filling the whopping 2,069 seats of the Dominion Theatre 8 times a week. So I think we can all agree that my boyfriend wins the Best Boyfriend of the Year award for getting me a ticket for Christmas. In the middle of the circle. Talk about a keeper. I deliberately didn't read any reviews before seeing the show, as I wanted to be free of any preconceived notions. And I have to say, I was a bit disappointed. The musical adaptation of The Devil Wears Prada is by no means bad, especially compared to some of the monstrosities that have circulated the theater scene in the past few years. But something about it was off. And it wasn't until I rewatched the film that I understood why. I never felt sorry for Andy in the musical. Even when Miranda asks her to move mountains, I never actually felt scared for her. Which I thought was an interesting realization, seeing the musical makes no big changes to the story. Andy has the exact same character journey in the musical as in the movie. So what's different? There's only one way of finding that out, my friend, and that is by doing an in-depth analysis between the Andys. Which probably sounds beyond ridiculous for quite a lot of people, but when I tell you that I live for this shit, and if you do too, you know where the subscribe button is. Let's do it! The opening montage of the film, where we see New York girls getting ready for work, and where Andy in a very early 2000s fashion gets portrayed as the not like other girls girl. She doesn't wear fancy lingerie. She eats bagels instead of counting almonds. She takes the subway instead of a taxi. That whole segment gets replaced by opening number I Mean Business in the musical. Seeing this moment is now accompanied by lyrics, the writers take the opportunity to give us Andy's backstory. Which, even though I was kind of just snubbing the opening of the film, I actually really like the choice of keeping Andy quite anonymous. Like, we don't really know who she is when she starts that job interview. There's a lot of intrigue about her still. Seeing shots of other girls getting ready really makes you feel the magnitude and the pace of New York City, a place where this Andy completely blends into the crowd. But that's not to say that giving Andy a backstory is a bad choice, it's just a different approach. Making her backstory as boring as humanly possible, now that is a bad choice. I Mean Business tells us next to nothing about Andy. She's done a lot of interviews and she wants to be a writer. Cool, what else? Oh, she was born on the wrong side of the Hudson. Say no more. The chorus literally goes, I mean business, oh yeah. I mean business, yes I do. I mean business, New York City. By giving her this generic backstory, we kind of retreat back to Andy blending into the crowd territory. Except for that doesn't really work when she's the only one singing. The spotlight is literally on her. Pretty much the exact opposite of anonymity, if you ask me. Either you make the choice that you keep the intrigue by retaining information from the audience, or you have an entire opening song dedicated to her getting ready for her interview. But then we need more. We need to fully understand her motivation, the stakes, what makes her her. Straight away, I kind of felt like the writers themselves perhaps didn't really know who Andy was. Foreshadowing. Andy's arrival at Elias Clark, the building that houses Runway, is pretty much word for word the same in both versions. The musical adds in some unnecessary exposition and some jokes like 2 points for Gryffindor, which I personally didn't find very funny, but you know, I did get a giggle from the crowd, so clearly I'm just jaded beyond repair. The sole purpose of these extra lines is to basically ensure that the show is long enough to fill 2 acts. They are of no real significance, which is extremely frustrating to say the least. The genius of the film is that even though the dialogue is very concise, the audience always has all the information it needs. It's a very efficient script. So to slow it down by adding in repeats of exposition is kind of a faux pas. The musical, however, does successfully manage to translate Miranda's epic arrival as this dramatic, slow motion sequence, ending with her coming up out of the stage to mimic the iconic elevator shot. It's important to also talk about the things that did go well. Miranda's lists of to-dos for Emily becomes the song The House of Miranda, with yet again quite repetitive, generic lyrics. I'm sensing a pattern here. In its defense, I couldn't really understand all of the lyrics, especially like the low rumblings of the male chorus. This is the house of Miranda. Maybe I missed all of the good lyrics. Basically, we need a cast album. But to get back on track, all of this to say that movie Andy and musical Andy at this point are still pretty identical. But not for long. In a sad turn of events, Andy's friends Lily and Doug get cut from the musical. I can see that perhaps due to budget restrictions, the creators had to limit the amount of actors and so decided to cut these characters because they aren't really crucial to the plot. But I think this might be their biggest mistake. Because even though the scenes with the friends might seem a bit frivolous, they are paramount to convey Andy's transformation. Not only do we get to know Andy more, we get to see how she relaxes, the jokes she cracks, but we also see her attitude towards Runway change from a job that pays the bills to I must take every phone call or I'll die. These scenes could have been the ideal opportunity to redeem Andy's boring opening number, but alas. I guess you could argue that they attempted to convey the same things in Andy's scenes with Nate, but quite frankly, they failed. Lily and Doug are, by the way, not the only ones of Andy's entourage who get cut from the musical. Andy's dinner scene with her father is also scrapped. To reduce Andy's entire social circle to just her boyfriend, yikes. Especially because I think the musical doesn't even do a good job at portraying that relationship. Sure, they get a fun duet, but the moments that really matter, like the breakup or the reconciliation, are both quite lackluster. I never truly felt Nate's frustration with Andy, which, given she doesn't have any other relationships in the musical, is kind of essential. For a story that is entirely based around Andy being torn between her work and her personal life, it's kind of crazy not to show us her personal life at all. Like, how am I meant to feel sorry for her when I don't even know what she's missing out on? The musical tries to deliver the theme of work-life balance by having Emily tell Andy a few times that nothing in her personal life will ever matter more than her job at Runway. But because all these scenes get cut, the message kind of gets lost. You can't just be like, oh, this character will mention it once or twice, so, we can scratch that off the list. Yes, of course, cognitively we all understand that The Devil Wears Prada is about a career taking over your life. But because we don't really see Andy's personal life, we're not that emotionally invested. We genuinely have nothing to compare her life at Runway with. After the infamous cerulean monologue, musical Andy decides to quit. She explicitly states that she's quitting because she's not the girl for the job. Maybe I could be Andy Sachs one day. Criticizes the musical to shit, but still somehow expects a job offer, yeah. Delusion. Which makes it really hard to then moments later have her decide that she won't grant Miranda the satisfaction of leaving and will stay on for at least a year. To make such a switch in gears believable, we really need a good foundation for this moment to stand on. Something planted earlier in the story that justifies this sudden 180. Maybe a raison d'être that she sings about in the opening song? I mean business, oh yeah. Awkward. She's the smartest, most hardworking girl. Okay, so why does that make her suddenly want to prove herself to the fashion industry? Movie Andy only decides to quit when she is hit with the unpublished Harry Potter manuscript ordeal. And even then, she doesn't really decide to quit because she doesn't want the job anymore. She decides to quit because she thinks Miranda is going to fire her. So she calls her boyfriend to tell him that she's quitting. Now, in the musical, that is already the second time that Andy is supposedly quitting, so that really drastically lessens the impact of that statement. When her call then gets interrupted by Christian to say that he did find the manuscript, in the film, Andy takes a moment to consider her choices. The option is suddenly still available to stay a Miranda girl, but is that what she wants? She takes a breath and she goes for it. This pivotal moment in the film is completely cut out of the musical. Christian calls her and she's instantly ecstatic. Why isn't she torn anymore? Why are you skipping her most pivotal moment in her character transformation? I'm so frustrated. Andy's makeover becomes the song Dress Your Way Up in the musical. A straightforward choice, I think, for that moment to become a full-blown musical number, and it does what it's meant to do. It's a fun song about fashion. Nothing groundbreaking, like florals in spring, but it does the job. Annoyingly though, the musical doesn't seem to grasp the idea that Andy's physical transformation is a sign of her inner transformation. In the film after her makeover, we get a little scene where Andy answers the phone as swiftly as Emily does on Andy's first day. This moment is crucial as it tells us that Andy is no longer the bottom of the barrel. She's now pretty much equal to Emily, and Emily can feel that threat. Definitely a shame that the musical only focused on her outfit change. For a story that is centered around Andy's transformation, the musical writers do seem to cut out quite a lot of the clues that would inform us of said transformation. Instead of naturally having this build-up where Andy slowly loses sight of who she is and what she stands for, the musical delivers it all in one big whammy at the end of Act 1 when Andy gets asked by Miranda to go to Paris with her. All of the keystones in Andy's transformation, like the second dinner scene with her friends in the film where she starts to defend Runway, the moment of self-reflection after the Harry Potter manuscript, her deciding to stab Emily in the back and accept the invitation to Paris. All of this happens in the song Miranda Girl. Whoa, give us a moment to breathe. Especially Paris is something that should take a huge toll on Andy. The film makes sure to show us her doubt. Walking the streets of New York, going through her old articles, reminding herself of why she's doing all of this, basically convincing herself that this is the right choice, even though that kind of betrayal is something that feels so unnatural to her. This is a defining moment in her character journey. The lack of emotional build-up in the musical makes this shift have less impact. And to top it all off, musical Andy actually goes back to the ball instead of going to Nate's birthday. What? In the film, she goes home, but gets stuck in traffic, which leads to Nate being absolutely pissed with her. She made the right choice and she's still getting punished? See? I care about movie Andy. I wish I could say the same about her musical counterpart. The scene where Andy meets writer Christian Thompson gets pushed forward in the musical as part of the song Are You In or Out? And I must admit that the juvenile part of me was kind of giggling at the idea that they might have a reprise of this song during their night together. Baby, are you in or out? Grow up, Anne. Moving this meeting forward in the story does mean that Andy now has not yet become fashionable. Christian likes her for her real self. In the movie, this scene takes place after her makeover, and so their connection can be viewed as more shallow, which it probably should be. Christian's role in the story is to seduce her, to lead her astray, not to form a genuine connection with her. Musical Christian is way less sly. The film has a scene at Lily's art exhibition where Andy runs into Christian, who seizes the encounter to already plant the seed of having a little fun together in Paris. Uh-oh. He really adds a certain level of danger to the plot in the movie. In the musical, he only really becomes a threat when he asks her for dinner in Paris. And at that point, her and Nate have kind of already broken up, so doesn't really matter anymore. In the film, Lily sees their flirty interaction at the art exhibition, calls Andy out for it, which leads to Nate finding out about Paris. This is honestly sublime writing, like every beat lands. And of course, the musical decides to replace this whole section with a song where Nate sings about how much he misses the old Andy. Yawn. Andy has way less excuses as to why she shouldn't sleep with Christian in the musical, which I am on the fence about. I'm sure the writers changed this because in the film that interaction hasn't really aged well at all. Christian pretty much completely disregards Andy's consent, but at the same time she's still giving excuses in the musical, ergo saying no at first. So is it really all that different? For the sake of storytelling, it is very excited to prolong this moment. Will they or won't they? But for the sake of humanity, I guess, understandably the musical writers wanted to minimize romanticizing that toxic behavior. But is it really a bad thing for evil characters to do evil things? You know, we still have loads of films about murderers. Christian's not our love interest. Like, he's very clearly the bad guy. Well, at least in the film he is. In the musical, he's kind of nothing. I appreciate the effort to make that dialogue a bit more woke, lol. But maybe we should have just changed the entire scene then. I don't really know the answer either. I'm just merely pointing out that it doesn't work. Can we have a moment of silence to commemorate Andy's toe ring in the film? Thank you. We can't talk about Andy without talking about Miranda. Their dynamic is instrumental to our perception of Andy. In the musical, Chairman Irv Ravitz's first scene is reimagined as a scene with Miranda instead of with Nigel in a lift. Now, Irv storms into Miranda's office and Andy fails to stop him. Even though the dialogue isn't too dissimilar, the intention is completely different. In the film, Irv almost laughs off this $300,000 loss, when in the musical, he's angry at Miranda for it. It's an interesting choice to make the audience aware this early in the story that Miranda isn't in fact the top dog. This somewhat humanizes her, and so she loses a bit of her satanic power. For us, the audience, to feel for Andy, we need to view Miranda as this untouchable entity who calls all the shots. The writers even doubled down on this choice by adding in another scene later in the musical where Earth threatens Miranda, saying she shouldn't focus on this ball but more on her job. Another bold choice from the musical is that it decides to get rid of the book, the symbol of Miranda trusting Andy. Perhaps they thought Andy being able to deliver the unpublished Harry Potter manuscript would be enough to convey that shift in their relationship. But I don't really think that's the same thing at all. Like, being impressed by someone because they can make the impossible happen is very different than trusting someone with a key to your home. Andy becoming the one to go to Miranda's house daily is a sign of personal closeness. Andy then of course ruins that by going upstairs and walking in on Miranda and her husband having an argument, and that then becomes the catalyst for Miranda to give Andy the impossible task of finding the unpublished Harry Potter manuscript. In the musical, none of this happens, and the impossible Harry Potter request comes a bit out of the blue. Miranda just randomly asks it after Andy's makeover, supposedly to test if her outfit isn't the only thing that has changed. I think the Harry Potter request works best as a form of revenge. Miranda wants to make Andy suffer in the film because she's embarrassed that she saw her fight with her husband. That is way more powerful than Miranda just playing games with Andy for the sake of it. I think the biggest change between Andy and Miranda's relationship in the musical and their relationship in the film is that Andy's not that afraid of Miranda in the musical. When Miranda announces that Jacqueline is the one to take the creative director role at James Holt instead of Nigel, musical Andy reacts very strongly and not demure at all, saying she wants to bring it up to Miranda? Excuse you? You should be petrified of this woman. The thought of defying this woman should not even enter your little coconut brain. Andy fearing Miranda is imperative. Everything she has done so far, which has been extremely out of character for her, she has done because she's afraid of Miranda. But let's just state the obvious here. Musical Miranda is nowhere near as scary as movie Miranda. And I don't think that has anything to do with the actors. The musical writers seem to be really invested in making Miranda more likable. I'm sorry, what? Like I mentioned before, early on in the story, Irv somewhat puts Miranda in her place, making her lose a bit of status. Then she gets not one, not two, but 3 solos. Why do you want me to care so much? If I'm not afraid of Miranda, then I'm definitely not believing that Andy is afraid of Miranda. Honestly, it kind of felt like maybe the musical wanted to make Miranda the protagonist. And that hunch got somewhat affirmed during the bows. I was a bit shocked to see that Vanessa Williams, who plays Miranda Priestley, got the final bow. Traditionally, the final bow is always for the lead character, and it's kind of undeniable that Andy is the protagonist of our story here. Like, we follow her journey, her transformation is the crux of the entire story. I'm not saying that Vanessa Williams was bad, like, I think she did quite a good job, but man, I'd be so annoyed if I was Georgie Buckland. Like, you just spend 2 hours belting your tits off, and the most coveted bow goes to the celebrity. Oh my god, I'd love to know what the energy was like in the room during rehearsal bows. Everyone just keeping their mouths shut but bursting to gossip about it later in the pub. But am I really that surprised? Just one look at the website says enough. This is the world we live in. Producers rely solely on star casting and remakes. In conclusion, I think the musical did their protagonist dirty. I obviously don't think they did it on purpose, but I think they never really considered the effects of their changes on Andy. Were they just banking on the fact that Anne Hathaway did such an amazing job that people will love her anyway? I mentioned that the writers don't really seem to have a clue who Andy really is, and to play the devil's advocate, who undoubtedly also wears Prada, the film also doesn't give us much more details on Andy's past or what her specific goal is. But those things don't matter because we care for Andy in the movie. We live through all of her emotions with her. By scrapping most of her personal life, plus cramping all of Andy's changes into one song instead of having it grow naturally, the musical writers created a shell of who Andy actually is. Andy's pretty dull in the musical, like, I don't care about her. And I'm clearly not the only one. Georgie Buckland, who portrays Andy in the musical, didn't even get nominated for a What's on Stage award, which is kind of insane because she's definitely proven to be a force to be reckoned with. But that's not her fault, it's how Andy is written. But guess who did get nominated? Oh, but of course, Vanessa Williams. And Amy Di Bartolomeo, who plays Emily, but I actually had the cover for Emily, who I'd love to give a shout out to because I thought she was brilliant, but the website doesn't say who was the cover. Out of respect for all the covers and swings that constantly step in to save your £1 million productions, you should really have that fixed. Am I saying that you shouldn't go watch The Devil Wears Prada musical? No, of course, that's not what I'm saying. It's a fun night out. I wouldn't pay an extortionate price for it because it's not life-changing or anything, but if you have the opportunity to see it, why not? Whilst I was watching the musical though, one question kept coming to mind, and that was why? Why did they make a musical adaptation of this film? Usually, as is so beautifully demonstrated by the Legally Blonde musical adaptation, a musical version of a film will enhance the story, will perhaps take a slightly different angle, will basically have something to say. Here, the script was almost word for word identical in a lot of scenes, which I agree, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But then why remake it? What's the point? Yes.
The point is, we really need to figure out where to place Donatella because she's barely speaking to anyone.
So it's money. Am I surprised? No, of course not. I am well beyond the point of being that naive. But simply pointing out that it is a bit of a missed opportunity. That's all.